Hello and welcome to our live stream. Thank you for joining us. Today is going to be actually a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about poultry. Are your poultry at risk? We're using thermal to detect avian flu. And with me, so my name is Benjamin Preston. I'm the marketing manager here at MOBOTIX. With me today is John Washko. He's one of our TPEs based out of Florida. John, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Ben, it's always a pleasure.
So this topic is, I would have never thought as like a solution for like that MOBOTIX would dive into. And I think I was talking with you about avian flu, which I did not know was on the rise, but like I was just researching it earlier today, and it's apparently like rampant.
Yeah, so I do believe this, we'll say, wave kind of started on the west coast of the U.S. this year. And I believe we're also over, at this point, 20 million chickens that have been culled in the U.S. I know down here in Florida, we just had our first cases reported of it at the zoo not too far away from my house. But the avian flu, as we refer to it, is just kind of like a shorthand term for it's basically a really long term. It's HPAI, which is avian influenza, the last two letters. And it's a very contagious disease that not only affects the chickens from a health point of view, but and then from that point, it's going to affect potentially humans or anybody working with them. The real downside is when culling has to be involved, and especially at the scale that we're at right now, is that has a direct effect on obviously the income for the farmers, and then that resource or lack of resource will then affect consumers from a cost. And I can say just here in Florida, I'm already seeing the cost of chicken or poultry products on the rise. And as someone who only mainly eats that, it's
I as somebody who loves chicken like all the time. When I was living in Virginia, even when the pandemic started, that was like people were scared that the supply chain was going to be, because there was people were getting sick, so they weren't able to work the poultry kind of manufacturing plants. So there was a lot of concern about like, how is this going to impact prices, supply chain, all this stuff. But I was even seeing like a lot of countries, including, the U.S. There was like France was on there. There was a couple other countries that were like locked down with like avian flu stuff because they didn't want it to spread.
That's correct.
Which is crazy. Okay, so let's dive into the actual solution. Oh, I want to add this before we jump into, if anybody has, because I just am very interested to hear more about this topic, so I forgot to mention this. If anybody has questions, comments, anything, drop them in the comment section below. We'll respond to them or address them on the call. And then the other thing is, if you have questions that are more in detail, if you are an end customer looking for a solution, reach out to us. If you're a partner and you want to get in on this market, you want to kind of figure out how MOBOTIX can do a deeper dive solution with potential customers, feel free to reach out to us at us-sales@mobotics.com. All right, John. So walk me through this. So we'll talk about the MOBOTIX solution in just a second, but I want to dive into so first of all, what's causing, obviously the flu, avian flu is like, you can't really, I guess, get rid of a virus because that, as we've seen with the pandemic, it just spreads. But from what I understand, and this is what I want you to kind of help me explain or help me figure out, there's a lot of leading causes that lead into avian flu that a lot of poultry farms are doing incorrectly. Is that right?
I would agree. Some of it comes to, and without getting too far into like organic farming or sustainability, honestly, just the size of the hutches that are being utilized in some poultry farms. And this is, without again going too far into the MOBOTIX solution right now, one of the things that can be measured with thermal is a combination of airflow within, we'll just refer to as a hutch, for the birds, whether it be turkey, chickens, whatever, ducks. And when they're all together, it's just like, honestly, utilizing COVID as the example, the more people in a smaller area through air quality, whatever, it's easier to transmit diseases. So when you have thousands of birds congregated into one area, it can honestly start with something as simple as one bird who got it due to, whether it be a transportation thing, someone coming from a different farm, maybe possibly a regulatory issue.
So it's something,
far into that aspect of it, but
so if it's something like, it's almost like creating the perfect incubator for virus spread between heat, the heat and all that other stuff. So when we're looking at MOBOTIX solution, so you mentioned kind of the hutches, the airflow, heat stress, like all of those things that are affecting the birds and almost the conditions in which the viruses are spreading faster. So let's look at like the heat stress, the airflow. What does the solution look like? Because I think you mentioned thermal. What does that solution look like from a MOBOTIX standpoint?
From a MOBOTIX standpoint, just from that area, you generally think, and this goes back to even chicken brooding, like you want a warm environment for the chickens or birds to grow into. However, a warm environment isn't always necessarily the correct environment. So while average brooding temperature in a hutch might be 85 degrees Fahrenheit, just because it's 85 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't actually mean that it's good quality air.
Mm-hmm.
So going from that, utilizing a thermal camera, we can actually measure not just the surrounding temperature or the physical temperature of the birds themselves, but you can see the air temperature or the ambient air temperature. And when you have a lot of birds congregating in a very poorly ventilated hutch, the heat obviously shows on the heat map that everything's hot, and that causes induced stress on the bird. And just like a human, when you have induced stress, you're more open to, getting different viruses, colds, whatever. The other aspect is with that much heat without ventilation, you have an issue with humidity, and humidity can cause dampness in the hay or whatever is being used as the base of the hutch, which actually then lowers the temperature on the floor level, which could affect the chicks, while increasing the higher temperature in the hutch. So having a thermal camera monitoring inside of the hutch, especially where there's a lot of birds, you can see if the airflow is proper, where you just see maybe the birds' heat signatures themselves, but an overall less warm ambient air temperature, which the birds are still being kept at their proper heat requirement, but the airflow is cleaner and better regulated.
Yeah, and I was interested too. So from because one of the things that comes to mind is if we're talking about thermal, the almost like the size of the building that these are in, or if it's something where there's multiple buildings being covered. So I'm one of the things that went through my head is this only something that's going to work for small businesses? Is this something that's going to be scalable for large businesses? But I wanted to kind of pick your brain, because it seemed like for some of the pictures that I saw that it was able to detect like a very large facility.
That's true.
Airflow and stuff.
Correct. And I mean, each type of poultry farm is you have your people who are just doing local farming. You have larger scale facilities doing commercial grade, and especially the advantage of having different thermal options from number of pixels, it really can allow even a smaller business to have that same functionality as a larger coop. And then without getting too far into the hardware, I mean, we could honestly talk about like a VGA TR thermal, where we're able to monitor multiple points of heat signature or pixelated heat, just utilizing one thermal sensor. Okay. So I don't know necessarily if it's like, I have too small of a farm, this won't benefit me. I think from any size facility, it would be beneficial. I mean, I'll be honest. I've been looking at getting chickens myself and setting up a camera just to check it out and see, because I would want to get them as chicks, and heat signature and making sure the chicks are at the right temperature is important for brooding. again, mentioning my last bit.
Which when we get into like when you actually start having them and they hatch, I want to do another webinar specifically on that because I think that would be so funny.
Yeah, right now I gotta handle the dogs and get them under control.
Yeah, one step at a time. Okay, so we talked about the conditions, and I wanted to ask you another question because I know we had an interesting solution. So we talked about like almost setting up the rules or kind of like the measurements for thermals to measure like airflow, insulation, like all that stuff. So making sure that the actual conditions of the birds themselves is not creating this incubator for a virus to spread. But I wanted to ask about another solution that we had for the pandemic for COVID-19. We actually had thermal cameras set up in buildings that were monitoring people's heat, and if they were elevated heat levels, not that it would be able to say, oh, you have COVID, but it was able to say, your temperature is above normal, go you get tested, or you're not, if your temperature is above a certain level, like that's obviously reason for concern in the middle of a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so? Does it work the same way? And maybe this is a dumb question. Does it work the same way with birds?
It's not a dumb question. I think that's actually a very perfect leadway into the next aspect. Yes, we can measure elevated temperature in birds, just like we could if they were cattle or fish even, or horses, whatever livestock you're utilizing. Elevated temperature is something that can be measured. We do have a tech partner we're working with right now, trying to really utilize that and find the exact temperature measurements. And obviously the difference between a cow, we'll say, and a chicken, though, is size. But the other difference is you might be able to measure one cow at a time because of how they move through a facility, whereas there's usually dozens of chickens moving at any time. So that's where with our tech partner, we're working on a analytic and AI-based solution in combination with the thermal sensor to actually measure each chicken so that if a situation were to arise where maybe you have 1 or 2 or 20 chickens that might have an elevated temperature, you might be able to basically quarantine those chickens before it spreads throughout the rest of the flock. So from like a scalability, like you could realistically kind of measure a percentage. So say like 1% of your chickens have an elevated temperature. If you pull them before maybe they integrate or the virus spreads, I mean, still 1% might be on a 200,000 chicken farm,
right?
But
that's a big deal. I mean, especially too, like when you have that many, and this I'm going to probably jump into this too, but one of the things that I think is so interesting about MOBOTIX cameras, especially like our thermals or like our IoT stuff, is the analytics that go along with them, because there's so many different things that like you can do with cameras. So if you wanted to set up a rule or something, and this is me speaking as a marketing person, just being very excited about this. If it was something where people, you had like a certain temperature level, if it got too hot, if it got too cold within the facility, or there was a heat rise on a certain bird or something, that like you'd be able to get a notification or be able to see that from like a server or wherever you're viewing your content from. Am I thinking about that correctly?
You are. And the really way to think of like any camera, we'll use that term nowadays, is everything is event triggered. That's really, and especially from the MOBOTIX standpoint, that's what we want. An event could be something as simple as a temperature spike, or possibly a temperature drop, motion detection. I believe in some scenarios they're even looking at utilizing slip fall technology in cattle or bovine situations to see if the cow's limping or walking improperly, to show if it's sick. Now, from a farming perspective, obviously that's beneficial because you can literally create an event that would trigger maybe something as simple as a text message to go to the farm owner or the field hand. You can also trigger it so it creates a recording, so you can go back and review that area. And that's really where MOBOTIX is flexible, I think is a good term. It's what is your need, and we can create the solution around it. So if you want to record all of the chickens moving all of the time, all of that can be recorded. If you only want it to do a specific thing where, if there's a specific heat spike or drop, we can record that and send the event to email, text, whatever. But that's really the strength of the product and helping the end user with, what is their need and how can we help with that.
Yeah, so I want to do this plug because you mentioned the cow thing too. So I know agriculture is definitely something where we have a lot of new upcoming solutions that are kind of looking at using more of the. I think there was even something like recognizing tags on their ears and stuff like that. To me, that is just so cool. So I want to put this plug in, and I don't know if people are commenting, asking about technical information. But if anybody has any, comments, if this is something you're interested in, feel free to reach out to us-sales@mobotics.com. I just wanted to throw that in there because you mentioned the cows, and agriculture is a big space that we're branching into. So I think that's just awesome.
Yeah, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about different forms of agriculture, and I think we're not only just utilizing thermal, but other applications for our devices, we can really, I think, succeed in that vertical.
Yeah. So in terms of like hardware, I'm assuming, and this could be wrong, I'm assuming it's like an M73 kind of thermal camera, or are there other product? I mean, I'm thinking it's probably going to be a mix of actual hardware, analytics, and then some sort of like cloud storage or something like that. What would the actual, I guess, best case solution look like for somebody if they wanted to dive into this?
Okay, so I would say, speaking from the MOBOTIX standpoint, there's three options I think we could really go into. The M73 with a thermal sensor would obviously be, that's the bread and butter, or the easiest one. But then as far as our 7 series goes, we would also be able to utilize the S74 because we can attach a thermal sensor to that. In some scenarios, especially maybe a smaller facility, that might actually be a better way to go because, again, using my flexibility word, that particular camera has a lot more capabilities as far as mounting, or even maybe a lower profile if you don't want it to be seen for whatever reason. And then even going into our 6 series, the M16 with a thermal sensor could do this as well. When we get into the analytics aspect, again, we would go to tech partners, or depending how we're utilizing it, we may need to go server based. So whether you have a on-site VMS or an on-site server to run the analytics, if it's not something that we have built into the cameras themselves, we can. And again, this is go into our partnerships while we have tech partners so that we can develop a solution by need. But after that, you're looking at basically your standard networking. So, a PoE switch. If you want to record and only keep it on site, that's where your VMS is, or we can do cloud-based solutions where, it's accessible via the web, or a different login, different computer, different locations. But having that flexibility really allows us to suit small farms, medium farms, large farms, and whatever need they may have.
No, this is such an interest. Like, I literally could go. I don't want to go on too much longer because we don't want to spend all day talking about this, but super interesting solution. So I want to just plug this one more time. If you're interested in this, go to us-sales@mobotics.com, or you can visit our website, mobotics.com, and get more information on our thermals, our different solutions like that. John, is there anything? I know we covered a lot. I want to make sure that we kind of are customizing our solutions to people. So I don't want to kind of deep dive into every possible scenario, but is there anything else that we, in regards to like avian flu, poultry, or even just like agriculture in general that you think is like up and coming that people should know about?
Well, maybe this would be a topic for another day. And I know I've touched on bovine culture a few times, but there's a lot of things. And going off of what you said about the tags on the ears, we have AI that can read that, but also utilizing maybe thermal from an aspect in a farm where if you mount your thermal sensor high and you have a large farm area, not only utilizing it for like perimeter detection, like preventing maybe somebody from coming in, but if you have a large area to cover, a thermal camera, especially at night, you can get a very crisp image of the animal going on like, where they're moving to, or trying to, if maybe something comes in that's lost, and like when you're getting them into the stables, or I don't know all of the terms.
Any possible scenario. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, not just utilizing from a perimeter perspective, but, protecting your product too. I mean, that's realistically what we're talking about. Anytime we're talking agriculture, it's what is the product, whether it be, chickens, cows, plants. What are you doing? And in the case of a cow, it might be like that cow could be valued at several $1,000s, and if it's missing, sometimes it takes you a long time in the middle of the night to try to find where that cow's located, where a thermal imaging could help you like pinpoint that from very far away.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. We didn't even talk about that. Topic for another day. I want to make sure we do a follow-up webinar on cows, specifically cows and cow counting, and the slip and fall stuff I want to hear more about too. But with that, if anybody has, I'm going to put this up one more time. Feel free to visit our website, MOBOTIX.com, or if you have an idea or you have some solutions you want to talk through, feel free to email us, and I'll drop this in the comments as well. us-sales@mobotics.com. John, with that, I want to say thank you. This was super interesting.
It was a lot of fun, but
yeah,
I like to talk. So
we'll be having another conversation soon about probably everything else too. Literally could go on and on. But all righty. Well, thank you, John. I'll chat with you later.
Sounds good, Ben. Have a good one. Thank you.